The debate arc is back.
I was told that we should have a conversation about the LFG. I was given a screenshot of the LFG being very dead. I was just told, hey, you should talk about this.
Yeah. And I actually agree, because this in question, the screenshot in question, I like how we're deceiving the audience here. We're hiding them from the truth. It was a very interesting concept, actually. And I think it actually has a lot of merit. And I think this is particularly true on NA, if I'm not mistaken. But I'm not going to keep you guys in suspense anymore. Because the concept we're talking about is players moving from using the in-game LFG to instead using communities and discords only, therefore draining the LFG of players entirely. Because I think this is valid, actually. Even with something like Hardstuck, we have to definitely use it responsibly. You know, like I do really try and encourage people on this server to use the in-game LFG and the server LFG and the guild LFG, kind of blend them all together. So again, you have everyone kind of being smushed together. That's the goal of the platform. But I think you have to be very, very careful, because I think on NA, and there's nothing wrong with this, by the way, this is where it gets a bit confusing. On NA, I think a lot of people, I believe it's Raid Academy, right? I think a lot of people use the Raid Academy LFG, if I'm not mistaken, instead of the in-game one. And this actually, it makes it look like NA is in some ways deader than it actually is, because players simply don't interact with the in-game LFG whatsoever.
Yep, that's about right.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, when the new console comes out, people stop using the old console and start using the new one. Like, well, the majority, right? It's just when there's a newer, better thing, people are gonna eventually migrate over to that. And I don't even remember when the LFG was actually created. Because I don't believe the LFG in its current form was in the game at release. Is that correct?
Wait, what LFG? You mean the in-game
like
LFG?
The in-game LFG.
I think the in-game LFG was always there.
Was it?
Yeah.
Didn't they like
I think so.
some update to it or something? I feel like they did something, right?
It was like very early on, if it wasn't in the game from launch.
Yeah, it was, I think it was like 2013, but it certainly wasn't there at launch. I'm pretty sure, but it's been a long time, so I mean, what do I know?
Yep.
Anyway, the point is, it was a very different time when the LFG was created, a very different time. I don't think Discord existed back then.
No, definitely not. Definitely not.
Yeah.
Or if it did, it was probably like just something that no one had ever heard of.
Yeah. So, I mean, as new collaborative communication community platforms have been created, like Discord, I mean, Discord is the platform now, the LFG has become a little bit redundant and outdated. It's just not as good as it used to be. It's not as useful as these other tools that we have. So communities have taken it upon themselves to do it and do it better. So you can't really blame people for not wanting to use the in-game LFG if they have a superior tool outside of that, or a tool that they just find more useful or that works better for them.
Yeah.
And that's why a lot of these community discords exist. And I think the consequence of that is obviously that if you only use the in-game features, it does appear very, very dead. So my challenge to all of this would be, well, I guess it's time for a bit of an upgrade. Something has to be done with the current system that they used for LFG in-game, because it's just, well, it's a little outdated. You know, something new has to be done. I don't know that I have a very good answer to that, or any suggestions of what exactly they should do. But I've seen lots of suggestions on Reddit and stuff, and I think, oh, you know, like if they did that, it would probably be a little bit more usable. But in its current form, it's just nowhere close to what you can do in a Discord channel.
Do you know what I think the key issue is with the LFG? And I think you're going to like this. You're going to enjoy this. You're going to be all over it, like a pigeon on a chip. Seriously, you're going to go berserk.
Pigeon on a chip. All right.
Yeah. Yeah, seagull, pigeon, same thing. It's the fact that people lie to you.
Yeah, well,
I think that's the big one.
would...
I unironically,
Yes.
that's the big one. Because the in-game LFG is unreliable, right? You don't know what you're getting. You're like rolling the dice when you go in the in-game LFG. And it's funny, I chat with someone from Final Fantasy the other day, and did you know that they have a system where you can set your LFG on the duty finder, I believe it's called, because that's kind of like the role play system they have there. And there's a setting that you can set that only people who have cleared it are allowed to join. What an interesting idea. Okay, like I think this is what really drives people from using the LFG, is that it's very, very unreliable. And experienced players have absolutely no reason to do it, right? The only reason you would use the LFG is if you aren't in a community, basically, right? and honestly, if you aren't in a community, probably one of the first things that you want to do, if you're raiding, is join one, for the exact reasons that we're discussing here, right?
Yeah, I mean, the ability to communicate via voice is just superior in many respects as far as communication is concerned, right? It's just so much easier to get your point across and to explain things and to do things in real time rather than text. Obviously, there are some people for which voice communication doesn't work out or whatever, and so obviously there are still valid forms of communication outside that. But for the most part, it's just so much easier to talk to people and just say, go here, do this, and just control the engagement. The one point I wanted to really make was that, I mean, you talked about how it's unreliable. It's more difficult for the commander to organize a group and then, like you said, trust that people are going to tell them the correct thing. It's just way more confusing and time-consuming and tedious to set up a group in the LFG, because I actually saw a couple posts on Reddit recently where people were like, it is just hard to be the commander because people will join and then you don't know who's playing what, and then somebody leaves and you don't know if it was your quickness. You accidentally put both quickness in the same subgroup. If you're in comms or Discord, you can just be like, hey, name, are you quickness? Yes. It just doesn't get lost in the chats as easy. I find it very difficult to keep track of everything, and you have to be really on the ball, and you still make mistakes as the commander in the LFG. You'll accidentally put both the quickness. Somebody wants spotter and they don't have it, and you don't know if they need it, and it just goes on and on and on, right? If the harder you want to go as far as like optimization, the more complicated it becomes to form that group and to put people in the proper subgroups.
So, what do you think it would take to make people use the in-game LFG more, or like use it at the same time? Obviously we can do it culturally, but what are some realistic changes do you think they could add to the LFG? I mean, because let's be honest here, a full overhaul of the group finder, I don't think is very likely anytime soon. Yeah, maybe like in like a year's time, right? Or maybe an X-Pack 4. That would be like, headline feature where unmessing up the group finder LFG UI thing. What's something they could do realistically? Or does it have to come from the community? Because I think that we can change it, right? Like, for example, when we do this Commander Challenge, which is coming, by the way, okay, Commander Challenge is coming once we've sorted out some of the tech stuff here. Once we have that done, I guarantee the LFG is going to be very, very active with everyone trying to run loads of squads, right, and get as many players as possible so they can win the meme title, right, and like all the gold they get from the Commander Challenge. So we can do that culturally, but what could they do on the code side or on the game side?
Make LFG more attractive?
Yeah.
Boy, I don't know. It's just really complicated. Whenever you're looking at an issue like this, you have to think of all of the reasons why someone doesn't use LFG, and there's a lot. And then you have to consider what of all of those things that you list out or brainstorm for, what percent, like, how do I explain this? Like, if there were 5 things, is one thing like 80% of the reason people don't do it? And then another thing's like 1%. You got to find the most important things. And I'm not sure that I know, Cuff, which is most salient or most important. I suppose I don't know. I just gotta like start listing some things. People, it's complicated to make a group. When you make a group, you can't trust people necessarily. People already gatekeep really hard with like KP and stuff, which aren't good measurements of skill or aptitude. So in my opinion, if they were gonna go and do something really simple, everyone hates this one, but I would either make it so that you can inspect people's gear so that it's easier to tell whether somebody... So it's easier to tell if somebody's playing quickness or something. So it's just at a snap, you can be like, oh yeah, you're the quickness. You don't have to like communicate as much. Or I would do something like add labels so that you can say that you're quickness. But then again, that doesn't remove the trust problem, right? Somebody could say that they're quickness and then have like 2% quickness uptime. You don't know. So I think some of the easy stuff would be to just find a way to like label people in the UI so that when you do establish roles, you don't have to like keep track of them in your head. There are literally people that like keep a notepad up and like put the person's name and what they're playing, because it just confuses. Like if the 3 people leave after a boss, you just have to like ask everyone what they're playing again. It's really confusing.
Okay. So,
like a note system or a label system for players would be worthwhile somewhere.
Yeah.
Currently, have you heard that people like this? This is the problem with the LFG. People.
Yep.
And this is a community issue. People actually use their block list
what?
As a way to weed out the LFG.
Wait, what? What do you mean?
You've never heard of this?
What is this?
This has happened to me like a bunch of times. The commander, like a person will join and they'll say, hey, quickness. And then the commander will say, sorry, you are on my block list, goodbye. And then they will kick them. And then this happened to me the other day, and the person that got kicked messaged me and they're like, why did I get kicked? And I was like, Commander, why did you kick them? And they're like, they're on my block list. That means I don't want to play with them, and this is how I filter the LFG.
But what do they mean by
whoa.
that? Like, were they just like filtering by bad players or what? Like, what are they?
I guess like it's their subjective. Like, this player is bad, I'm going to never play with them again. And so you have commanders that are like, I mean, people would still do that no matter what you had, I guess. But like, it's just weird, right? Like, people are getting kicked for no reason, and then they're not told why they're getting kicked, and yeah, it becomes a bit of a mess. But yeah, people are actually doing that. It's super common. It's not like every commander is doing that, but I've seen it a bunch of times.
Do you think that all of this is ultimately derived again from that the lack of the Holy Trinity in a way? Because there is almost like a mandatory communication in Guild Wars 2 content. You can't, you don't just join and you know who's tanking, you know who's DPSing, you know who's healing. Like, you're gonna have to actually go, okay, you're doing this, you're doing that, you're doing this, and then you have to do it all again if some people leave, or if the group like implodes or something like that. Like, there is almost like a baseline level of social interaction that's necessary in Guild Wars 2 content. So I wonder if maybe the answer is actually indirect then. Do you think they should use the LFG just to really heavily just kind of commit to it and say, you know what? Everyone's using communities. Let's lean into that. So lean into stuff like guild advertisements, lean into community advertisements, for example. Maybe that's the way to go.
I think you and I discussed at one point that, in my opinion, some of these bigger communities ought to have like a permanent spot on the LFG or something, right? Because currently, you have to think about it like this. If you were a first-time player, like you wanted to get into end game content and you had just geared up and whatever, and you're like, oh, now I'm ready to do this. I looked at a few guides and things. You go to the LFG, and on NA, there is nothing. Like, it's zero. It's only selling, right? That's not a good look, right? That's a really bad first impression. I think I had used this analogy once before, but it's like if you walked into a convenience store to go get, like, some kind of drink or something, and you walked in and like every shelf was empty, and the employee was just standing there like, hey, welcome. You're like, okay, there's nothing in here. I guess I'll never come to the store again. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. That's the seller. It's like, hey,
The sellers they're
Anyway.
fully stocked. They're ready to go, you know? They're going to sell everything.
Like if you come with me into the back, you can buy this very expensive drink.
Ooh, yes. Exclusive.
Anyway. Yeah.
It's just
Anyway, I think that's a bit of a problem, right? So what's the solution to that? Well, if it's not as dead as it appears because people are all in communities, then just promote the communities.
exactly, yeah. No, but here, do you know the natural combo meme to that is though, Snip? I think if that were to happen, it would in itself require a bit of a cultural shift. Because there's a large section of the community that has no interest in doing that. They want to have this LFG experience where they don't necessarily have to join a specific group. And then what do you do about that? Because I'm trying to think of this from the perspective of how can we make endgame content easy to get into for players who want to get in there, right? And it has to be through the LFG to an extent. And I think that it has to be this way. Like communities, they're great. Nothing wrong with a good community. Hey, I love them. They're great. But I think there has to be something in the game
to get somebody into a community. Like you can't just be like, oh, I want to do end game content. I'm now gonna go join these 5 communities. It feels like just a lot of steps. People need to get a taste of it before they want to commit more. Right?
Yeah.
Like a sample. LFG is a good place to go get your feet wet, try out some things, get some groups, and you're like, oh, if I want to take this to the next level and get a more committed group or get people more serious, then maybe I'll join a guild or a community or whatever. But if they never have the opportunity to do that, they're just never going to try the content.
Okay.
And whenever we tell people to just make their own groups, they're not successful or effective.
Why aren't they? Why not? Why aren't they successful or effective?
I think it's kind of a culture. Well, it's not. I shouldn't say that. They're not all like massively successful. It depends what you define as success. They go in and I think at times as people, if we're not immediately successful at something, we can get frustrated with it. I know I'm like that sometimes. And so if you have people that go in and their experience with the game has been that things are fairly straightforward, but then they go into the more difficult content and they've just randomly picked up 9 other players, but maybe they're not super familiar with endgame content Guilders 2, they're going to get smushed a lot, and their experience is going to be that people won't stay committed to failing to learn. So they're going to have to constantly cycle in new players from the LFG, and your progression in that format is very slow because you're constantly putting somebody fresh into the mix. You're switching up the variables, so to speak, all the time, that it's hard to pinpoint where you're going wrong even. So it's just not a super effective way to get into endgame content, in my opinion. You need people that are committed to failing and progressing and learning.
Okay. So, do you think
in
that
my experience,
there has to...
I've never had an LFG like that, but maybe other people have.
What's the solution to that then? How do you deal with that? Is that just people need to kind of be used to the progression mindset? Because look, you want to know a story, guys? When Wing 1 first came out, Spirit Veil, I did nothing but Veil Guardian for 6 days. When we finally killed it on Saturday, when I went to bed, I could hear people saying green, blue in my head. I was like, terrified because I thought I was failing the mechanic. And when I closed my eyes, I could also see the arena lighting up because I'd been playing it for so long, right? There is this, and obviously it wouldn't be that bad with modern techniques, gamers. Don't worry, don't let me scare you off. But this is kind of the nature of that content, right? Giving up. Even if something looks really hard the first time you try it, that doesn't mean you can't do it with that same group. You know, I think I'm a little bit famous for this actually, is that I will I'll join a pug group, right? Or I'll make a pug group and do a strike mission, and it will go horribly, right? We'll feed hard and fast. We'll be inting. People are dying left and right. I actually did this with the new CM recently, the Aether Blade CM. It was an absolute disaster. People had no clue about the mechanics, zero idea. I forced them all to join voice, whipped them into shape, and we blasted it down no problem in around 40 minutes, right? And even though it looked hopeless, it became very easy very quickly, right? We were able to secure the kill. And I think more players need to be aware of that. Like, that is the nature of this endgame stuff, is that you do have to do this stuff. You're going to have to wipe. You are going to lose. You know, we already talked about this a little bit, but do you think in a way it's linked to the fact that you just aren't very well rewarded unless you succeed, and quickly as well? Right? I don't want to kind of go over old ground, but I think there is an element of that there, because, you know, unless you one-shot a raid boss, you are not going to get good rewards, right? Unless you, like, really care about legendary armor. Like, you're like, oh, dude, you know, I want these insights. I want to get this stuff. Like, this is all that matters to me, are these legendary insights. Then, yeah, sure, you're going to be rewarded well for that. But most of the time, you aren't. Oh, no. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I think to an extent that might be the issue. But I would contend that the bigger issue is people are interested in doing the content or trying it out. The problem is that it's not communicated well about, like, the expectations of the group are not necessarily communicated very well all of the time. People, I think generally what people put in LFG is like, hey, let's imagine that we're a new person, right? That they're just wanting to try this out. They're like, hey, new player trying to get into Wing 1 Veil Guardian. Join now. Everybody joins. They haven't indicated like, hey, we're doing this for an hour. Like, can you commit to an hour? Or, hey, we're doing this for 30 minutes. Like, it's not necessarily spoken about. And so everyone goes in with a different expectation and a different timeline, which is perfectly fine and reasonable because there wasn't an expectation. So if they all go in with different levels of skill, some people have gear, some people don't, those groups tend to really struggle because they don't really get anywhere, right? They don't really know what the problem is because it's hard to identify. The game doesn't really lend itself to identifying those problems very easily. And so typically what I found in those groups is somebody will just say, our damage is too low, and then everyone just gives up. But they haven't been able to identify a true problem or problems, right? They haven't figured out that, oh, well, we're not really doing this mechanic as well as maybe we could, or, oh, this person doesn't necessarily have the right gear. It's just the skill levels are just all over the place. So when you tell somebody, hey, just go make your own group, that's usually what they're contending with. And even if you're like a strong leader and you're interested and engaged in helping other players and like figuring this out on your own, it's just a very large barrier to break through. Because the next time you go to do that in the LFG, you're now going to experience 9 other different people that are all at those varying skill levels. So what I've heard people describe is they get kind of lost in this LFG perdition where they don't really have KP to get into like a more experienced group, but they're not necessarily super inexperienced because they've done a million pulls in these training
They've
groups.
wiped a lot.
Yeah, but it's not even, I mean, I was there 2 years ago, right? Like I was doing a lot of damage. I kind of understood the mechanics in my rotation, at least at enough of a level where I thought I was doing okay. But I would go into training groups because I couldn't get into any other groups, but the training groups would never succeed. And so I was frustrated because I think my first raid experience, I wiped to Veil Guardian for 3 hours. And keep in mind, I was eager to prepare for raids. Like I was really scared that I wasn't like good enough. So I had done the IBS strikes like every day for months and just practiced my rotation. So I went in on Hollow and I was doing like 25k DPS or maybe like 20k, right? I was doing okay for a new player to the raid, but everyone else that was a DPS player was doing like 10. And it just really held us back. And so I got to this point where it's like, well, I don't know what to do because I can't get into the like next level groups, like the next step, because I can't seem to get past this step. But I don't know if I feel like I'm exactly at this step anymore. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, no, I completely get what you mean. I think you're spot on there. You're bang on it for sure. You do end up in limbo a lot of the time, and it's a bit like tier 3 fractals, right? It's hard to break out.
Yeah, it's very frustrating for players, and I think a lot of players are in this spot where and I've spoken to a lot of players because, you know, I run statics in the Scan gang, right? I speak to players and they're like, I'm putting in all this effort, I'm improving at a faster rate than all of my teammates, and I'm not happy because I think that I can go to the next level, but I don't think my team can. This is only exacerbated when you go into LFG because you just have no way of having a consistent team. You can't identify who's lagging behind because every time it's going to be somebody different, and you can't help them progress unless you're willing to like take the people that you meet in LFG and then turn them into a community.
Exactly. It's exactly right. Why do you think other MMOs don't have this problem? They do a little bit, actually. That's not entirely true.
You'd have to enlighten me a little bit because I haven't played a lot of other MMOs recently.
I think that for getting into like the really sweaty content, there's a bit of a leap. But I mean, I never had difficulty getting into WoW raids ever. Even back in the day when the game was way less sophisticated than it is now, I would just join, and you just talk to people and you get in. I guess it's because they have automated systems that really helps there. Right, the fact that you can just, just like click a button and boom, away you go a lot of the time, even for some of the more challenging content, I guess. But yeah, Final Fantasy definitely does not have this issue. Yeah, sure. If you want to join like a Savage static or an Ultimate static, yeah, they're going to gatekeep you because, yeah, it's really hard content, right? And you need to be able to commit a long time if you want to play in this high-level content in Final Fantasy. But as I understand it, getting into like the basic content is very, very easy. In fact, I like I said, I had this conversation, like someone from the Final Fantasy community, actual Savage Ultimate Raider, messaged me the other day, and we had a back and forth conversation about the LFG, and they showed me screenshots of the duty finder and how some of the systems work there. And seriously, this blows my mind. This is crazy stuff. They said, I've rated Mythic in WoW, Ultimate in Final Fantasy, and I'm struggling to get into Guild Wars 2 raids because I can't, I can't effectively navigate my way into groups. Like how insane is that? How crazy is that? That's crazy.
Yeah.
Right?
It's not even necessarily a skill thing. I think that the skill thing, and Isa is in the chat, Isa would 100% agree with me. We had a player that joined the Scan gang, been eager to get into endgame content, into raids, and they had joined a bunch of like CM stuff, and they were doing very low DPS. And so I had to have a talk with them, and I was like, hey, don't think you're quite ready to join the CM groups yet. Like but we will help you. Like, how can we help you improve your DPS? And I kind of told them, like, we have mentors, and we took them from doing less than 5k DPS to doing 26k DPS in 30 minutes.
That's big.
That's all it took. Was just somebody like sitting down with them being like, this is how you do it. But so I don't know that it's necessarily that it's that people can't do it, right? I think that it's hard to find somebody to help you figure it out, and it's hard to then get a group that's willing to be patient with you as you're learning the mechanics of the boss. So it's kind of this twofold thing happening all the time.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that this does link into another topic that we discussed before, which is how hard it is to essentially make your own group? Like the barriers to entry that happen.
It's very hard. And anybody that says that it's easy doesn't really understand, in my opinion, that there's just a lot of layers of knowledge, and you don't know what you don't know. When I first started making groups, I didn't understand spotter, right? I didn't know which classes needed spotter. And so if you just tag up and try to like figure this out, some of the people in your group are going to be a little bit critical of you. And if you're new, that's really intimidating. Because everyone's like, hey, you need to change the subgroups. It's not necessarily that people are mean all the time. Lots of people are really helpful, in fact. But it's just when all eyes are on you because you have the tag, in a sense, you're kind of, it's just a little bit more nerve-wracking. So just making your own group isn't quite as easy as we make it sound. it's kind of strange because on one hand it kind of is, right? Like just pop a tag and just see what happens. But on the other hand, there is sort of the social element where it's like, holy crap, if we fail, it's kind of, people are going to look at me to tell them what to do. And what if I don't know what to do? And I think
the core concept
anxiety
of making a group is easy, but the actual execution is not.
Exactly, right? The concept, you just pop the tag, just click a button, and you are now leading a group. But when you actually go to lead the group, there's a lot of layers of knowledge that you might not have, and figuring out what those are even is a bit of a task.
Exactly. And that's a bit of a difficult one to get around, I think. I mean, what do you do about that?
Yeah,
exactly.
Good question, right?
Yeah, it is a good question.
We have to constantly be teaching people, and that's something that I've been sort of more vocal about. Is what I try to do lately on my streams is I'll say something like, "Hey, so if you're new to this, what I'm doing here," and like sometimes I'll just narrate my thought process, and honestly, sometimes I might be wrong, and the chat will correct me, right? And that's learning. That's fine. But I try to narrate my thought process with organizing the group, being like, okay, I'm trying to make sure that this subgroup has boons because this is how boons work in a very simple sense. And I need somebody that has this because they have these unique buffs that will help these people. And I just try to like talk this through so that more and more people will also learn it, right? And another thing is like I have people that want to command, but they're buying the tags, but they're just like, I don't want to let down the group. That's a huge deal for a lot of people. Like, I don't want to let down the group because I don't know if I know every role in Wing 1. Like, okay, well, you don't have to be perfect. It's helping people understand that it's okay if they don't know it perfectly. Or, alternatively, if they're still really upset about, well, not upset, but, like worried about it, you say, okay, well, I'll teach you. Like, when you're in the raid, if you ever have a problem, just, like, message me directly or something. It's about mentoring people into those roles so that they can mentor somebody else, so that they can mentor, and this link goes. But the problem is that it's hard to communicate with people that don't know if you're never trying to engage with those people. I think a lot of times people, once they get into a community, they don't necessarily have any need to go outside of that. And if they stay in a bubble for long enough, everybody around them knows. And they might like bring a new person in every once in a while, but there's this whole group of outsiders that don't know. So that's again part of the problem with communities and things is if you sort of make this very internal or sort of bubble it, there are a lot of people that if they're not in that bubble, they just don't know and you never engage with them.
It's why I think there are two really important things here. One, if you make a community, you should make it as open and forward-facing as possible, right? You should always try to interact with the quote-unquote real game at the same time as you interact with your community, right? You should avoid the full bubble, right? It should be an open bubble. The bubble's got a little window in it, right? That's what you want to see. And secondly, I always find myself feeling this way about Guild Wars 2, and I admit that I have bias here because this is what I think is the correct answer. So let's, bias confirmed, chat, okay? But I really do think that we need to be trying to create a cultural shift in the game. I don't see a way around this. We have to change the way people interface with the game, otherwise it's not going to get better, right? I don't think it will ever get better unless we're able to make it so that more people do feel comfortable to take the initiative and lead. Like we're talking about how a commander needs to lead the squad. I don't think that's even necessarily the case, right? When I tagged up for the strike mission challenge mode, I didn't know what I was doing, right? We'd never done it before, right? When I tagged up for Veil Guardian, when raids first came out, I'd never done any hardcore PvE in Guild Wars 2 before. It was like the first time I started playing that. So I think we need just to change the way people view this stuff, and get more people doing it, right? Like, I think you're absolutely right with stuff like mentorship. But I think that's where communities can be very, very effective, actually, because you can almost have like your community be like a factory for like model citizens that go out into the broader population, you know, and actually get stuff done and do stuff like
I want to shout
right?
out Win for a second, because Win did that a lot on
the
NA,
Cox,
right? They did it a lot because I joined LFGs a lot as well, right?
Yep.
And I'd always see a member of Win in there, like all the time. They would just jump, and then a couple of them would jump in, and they'd help a group get through it. And sometimes they would explain the mechanics if they needed explaining or whatever. They did a really good job at that. So that's why a while back when I said, you know, we're in a big trouble if some of these players stop playing Guild Wars 2 because they have a bigger impact on the community than people realize. And I think some people kind of scoffed at that and were like, oh, I don't think it's that big of a deal. New people will take the reins. I don't know. I mean, I'm still playing on NA, but it feels like there is a gap still. So I'm kind of waiting for those reins to be taken, because there's a noticeable gap on NA where LFGs seem to struggle just a little bit more to get going.
I do think it is really important that there are a lot of players out there kind of existing to mentor the community and interact with the community. I think this is really what we're talking about here when we're talking about stuff like Discord communities. I do think it's important that they are as open as can be, right? So players know that they exist, can join if they want to, and there's lots of outreach stuff. And that does, again, kind of reinforce my opinion that ArenaNet should look at making guild features and social features much better in the game. Because then you could show people the door, right? Show people the way in. Because I think a lot of these communities, like the raid training guilds and the relevant websites, they are actually pretty well known. And if you ask, you'll probably get the answer there too. But I think it would be good to have it directly available in game, because ultimately that is the way people want it. It's why we're even talking about the LFG now. It's because people want access to something they can click on and join and get involved. They don't want to have to go to a website and then look at a link and, you know, join this and join that and join 5 different discords. They want to be able to immediately get in on the action, like get a little taste, right? Get a little taste of the action. Otherwise, it's not really going to be it's going to be like very low value, right?
I mean, you see this in a lot of content, right? People, you'll say, oh, if you want to get into it, I mean, I saw this on Twitter the other day. Somebody was like, oh man, if you're failing at Dragon's End, I mean, discord.gg/hardstuck, they run lots of maps, and like you'll definitely get a kill with one of their commanders. Person's like, having to join a Discord to beat the meta? No thanks. Right? Like, people are not necessarily interested in joining communities all the time or going externally from the game. So it's very tricky, right? It's very tricky, because the argument is, on one hand, should you sort of require the community to come together for some content? And should that just be a necessity? I mean, do you even take their opinion with... Do you take it and I don't know, like, how seriously do you take that? Or do you really make things more accessible and put more stuff in the game so that it's just easier to make and navigate groups?
I mean,
like, where's the line is kind of what I'm looking for here. Like,
I think,
how far do you swing one way or the other?
If those communities were accessible in game, then I think everyone will be fine with it.
Oh yeah, like, imagine if you could just join the Discord in the game.
Well, I mean, is Guild Wars an RPG or an MMORPG?
Look, nah, you don't want to go down this road, because honestly, this is the reality of the situation. I'm gonna skip the next half an hour conversation real quick. A very long time ago, yes, MMOs were played as multiplayer games, but in the modern era, MMOs are predominantly played as single-player games. I know that sounds like an oxymoron, but it is a fact, right? There's no point in arguing with it. You can go, aha, like, I've got you on semantics here. Doesn't matter. That's not the way people engage with the content, right? It doesn't matter if that's intended or not. That is the way people play the game. They play them as single-player games. So you have to account for that when you're designing things and when we as the community are trying to respond to things. MMOs are single-player games. That sounds insane, but that is true.